I want to get you on the record because there's been some criticism of you that you flip-flopped a little bit in terms of the Iran deal. Your website has talked about, you have issues with it, but now that it's been implemented, you support implementation. Obviously, this area, in addition to a lot of senior citizens, has a lot of Jewish people.
Sure.
And I could tell you, my dad's like Mr. Zionist. God bless you.
Yes.
They're concerned that pretty much they want to know that you're like a vehement defender of Israel. A lot of them don't like the two-state solution.
Yes.
A lot of them were not happy with the Iran deal, which Debbie Wasserman Schultz voted for.
Sure.
Obviously, it's hard to say how you would vote because you weren't there. But what do you think of the Iran deal and also two-state solution and things like that?
Okay. So first, I am a very strong supporter of Israel, and it's not political posturing. I've lived in Israel. I've worked in Israel. I worked on a kibbutz. I've studied in Israel. I've had a stepdad for 40 years who's Jewish. I grew up in a very Jewish neighborhood. I'm a supporter of Israel for a lot of the reasons that many Americans are. Many Americans support a Jewish democratic state, a homeland. A lot of it is colored by the historical experience of the Holocaust. And, I take this very seriously, my support for Israel. And I'm not embarrassed or ashamed of it. I'm glad to speak up for Israel. By the same token, I would like to see a two-state solution. I've always been on record for a two-state solution. I know that, unfortunately, in recent years, there are more Israelis and Jewish folks, but also more Palestinians who are giving up on a two-state solution idea, and I think that's too bad. It's hard to get there, and I can understand the reluctance, certainly on the Israeli side, when you're surrounded by hostile neighbors that won't recognize your right to exist. And Hamas is controlling Gaza, which is part of the presumed Palestinian state that would be formed, and Hamas doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist. I can understand why people are souring on this, but I haven't soured on it. I don't see any other path to peace in the Middle East. As for the Iran agreement, I've been very consistent in my criticisms of it. I've been skeptical of releasing so much money all at once to the Iranian regime. It's a repressive regime, and we shouldn't forget that. And unfortunately, the uprising that occurred in Iran just a few years ago, which was brutally crushed by the Iranian regime, was really swept under the rug very quickly in the West. And I think that's unfortunate. I really think we do need to call out not just Iran, but Saudi Arabia and other regimes for the kind of human rights violations that are routine there.
And let's say you get elected, and as it looks right now, based on polling, it's President Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Hillary Clinton has pretty much said Israel could do no wrong. Bernie Sanders was criticized but complimented by many people during the campaign for being one of the few politicians who dared to say Israel's not always right. Are you willing, as a congressperson, if Congress and the president are pretty much backing Israel unequivocally, but there are human rights issues against Palestinians, possibly, you saw in Gaza last year criticism that it was a disproportionate response by Israel. Are you willing, if appropriate, to say we need to focus on Palestinian rights as well?
Well, I think it's important to focus on both the rights of people in both lands, absolutely. I do think that Arab Israelis have it better than Arabs do in probably any neighboring country. They've got more political rights and human rights generally. But it's a very militarized situation. There are times that Israelis have done wrong, and it's I think proper to point that out. However, if you're going to point to Israel's response to Gaza, to Hamas, to rockets being fired into Israel, I do think it's important to point out that rockets were being fired into Israel. I've spoken to American Jewish activists who are critical of the Israeli response to Hamas, who were claiming that nobody at all was killed by these rockets. And that's just not true. There have been many dozens of people killed over the years by rockets fired from Hamas. And while the casualty figure is disproportionate if you compare Israeli versus Palestinian lives, I think it's important to point out that Israel was responding, in fact, to rockets that were being fired. Now, I understand the counter-argument to that is that the Palestinians had no choice. Well, I understand that the Palestinians in Gaza are living under terrible conditions, but the kibbutz I worked on in the 1980s and went back to many times, every time I'm back in Israel, It was a left-of-center kibbutz. It was a Peace Now kibbutz. The members of that kibbutz were driving all the way down from north of Haifa to Gaza to help the Palestinians in Gaza with irrigation techniques. There was a real hope that there was going to be a peace and a two-state solution. The reasons for it breaking down are many, but the Intifada was not helpful. I don't think it's useful to talk about whether it's justified or not justified. I don't think it's justified to engage in suicide bombing at all. We wouldn't put up with it on the streets of an American city, and I can understand why Israelis respond with what might seem like disproportionate force when there are suicide bombers going off in the streets. And I pointed out, and I've lost a friend to a suicide bomber in Israel, and it's not atypical when you go to Israel. You meet people who quite often have lost loved ones. And I understand if you go to Gaza or go to the West Bank, to Palestinian towns, you're going to meet people who have lost loved ones as well and have suffered terribly. And there's suffering that's going on both sides. The point isn't that one side has to win over the other. We really do need a peace. The question is, how do you get to that peace? I think it's hard to have a peace until you deal with the problems surrounding Israel in the region. When almost every neighbor won't recognize Israel's right to exist, you got to ask, why is that? Many of these regimes are corrupt regimes where they're being ruled by oligarchies or theocracies, where the very top are getting rich, and they're blaming all the problems of their society on Israel, which is often hundreds and hundreds of miles away. So it's a very complicated problem, and I'm willing to talk to anyone about it. I know it's not always politically correct to take the position I'm taking, but I am constantly trying to learn and to understand the problem further.
Sharp turn. It's not a sexy topic, but it's an important one. The environment here is in peril, whether it's climate change. Florida, some climate scientists say, is about 10 years away from possibly being underwater.
Yes.
I don't know if that's dramatic, but there's also specific to this area about the algae.
Yes.
Can you kind of talk about that? Because from what I've seen, I looked far and wide. I didn't see much from Debbie Wasserman Schultz, what she's doing or pushing for to help this situation.
Well, let me describe the situation a little bit. Lake Okeechobee is a couple of hours north of here, and it's one of the largest inland lakes in the United States. It's been used as a cesspool for decades by big farming interests, including Big Sugar. And when I say used as a cesspool, it's not directly dumping. It's runoff from agriculture into the waters of Okeechobee. Okeechobee starts filling up with phosphorus and nitrates and other toxins. There's a dam system and dikes south of Okeechobee that prevent the natural flow of Okeechobee into the Everglades. The Everglades have been called the river of grass because Okeechobee for eons did drain naturally into the Everglades. Now instead, because of the dike system, Okeechobee flows east and west through a canal system and into some rivers such as the St. Lucie River. And you start seeing since it's not being the toxins are not being naturally filtrated by the plant life of the Everglades, they're flowing into the riverways. Rising sea levels and rising water temperatures have created a combination of factors that have led to this blue-green toxic algae bloom. And I actually brought some of this water here, if I can show you, and it looks like maybe a juice of some sort, but
I feel like an idiot for calling it pickle juice before.
This is toxic. It's killing manatees and fish. If you were to go swimming in this, you would be in danger of having your liver shut down. You'd probably be hospitalized very quickly. Just being right near it, I had to wear a mask, and after 10 minutes had a headache. So on the one hand, it's flowing through the waterways and coming down the coast towards our district and killing sea life, decimating the tourist industry. If that's not bad enough, you look at what's happening in the Everglades and Florida Bay, which is essentially our aquifer here in South Florida. Because of rising sea levels, there's been saline penetration into the aquifer. And people are worried that the aquifer will no longer be usable as drinking water if the present trend continues. So there have been plans to rectify both problems. Charlie Crist, when he was governor, had a plan by which the state would take over the sugar plantations south of Okeechobee, convert them into marshland, essentially start allowing water to flow naturally the way it used to into the Everglades, and the plant life would filtrate out the toxins. So that would take care of the problem of, the blue-green algae blooms and killing of sea life. At the same time, as you start to allow the water to flow naturally into the Everglades, it raises the water table and starts helping deal with the problem of saltwater intrusion. Now, that plan was hailed at the time, but it would have required money from the state to buy up the sugar farms. State voters passed an amendment, Amendment 1, which would have been a $500 million income stream from real estate taxes, but Governor Rick Scott has not used those funds for what their intended purpose was. Now, at the same time, Democrats and Republicans throughout the state have been silent. Nobody had been really raising the heat on Governor Scott to have any solution to this. Part of the reason is because, and this was reported by the Miami Herald just weeks ago, over the last 22 years, these big sugar companies have spent $57 million in campaign contributions for Republicans and Democrats alike in Florida. Big Sugar doesn't want to sell out their farms because they're making hundreds of millions of dollars a year in federal subsidies on those farms, subsidies that Wasserman Schultz has voted for. One of her biggest, I think her largest single contributor is the Fangul Corporation, a big sugar company. So Wasserman Schultz has been part of this problem, and she paints herself as a great environmentalist, but we're talking about the water supply of South Florida. It's hard to imagine South Florida surviving if its water supply becomes toxic.
Last question. Right now you're kind of looked at nationally as the highest profile Bernie-crat, if you want to call yourself that. Obviously there's some that even viewers who are kind of dispirited after Senator Sanders' loss. He endorsed Hillary Clinton, and now his movement, although I think it's still going strong, is a little fractured. You, in previous talk, called your race the ground zero for the progressive movement. Mm-hmm. Last poll I saw, you were down 10 points. Mm-hmm. What's at stake here? Obviously, you're focused on this area in Florida. What's at stake when looking at possibly defeating Debbie Wasserman Schultz?
Well, first, let me talk about the polls. We did a poll about 3 or 4 weeks ago that showed us down by 8 points with about 16% undecided, and an awfully large section of the voting population that still had not heard of me or didn't have a well-formed opinion. And when voters were given positive and negative messages about both me and Wasserman Schultz and repolled, it was a dead heat. So that was very encouraging.
Should say this poll I'm talking about only polled 400 people.
Exactly. So. The one that showed her up by 10 with a 5% margin of error, which implies we're 5 points down, and there's lots of reasons to think that the poll didn't even include sort of the universe of possible voters. We're trying to expand that universe, you could say, and they were really focusing on super voters, those who are always coming out. We've actually gotten thousands of Republicans and independents who have re-registered Democrat to vote for us in this primary. It's a closed primary, which speaks well of this campaign and the idea of expanding the party to push for progressive change through a larger party, not through voter suppression. I think this is a bellwether election. If a grassroots movement can take down such a corporate-dominated Democrat in a primary, I do think it gives a lot of hope and a model for others to do the same thing in 2 years for maybe a brand new Congress. That's one of the proposals that's out there. What distinguishes our campaign from a lot of campaigns, not from all, but from a lot, is that we vowed from the beginning that we wouldn't take a penny of any corporate money. None of the corporate-funded PACs, no super PACs, and we've abided by that pledge, and we've been rewarded for that pledge. 180,000 times somebody has clicked on the donate button, and we've had an average contribution size of $17. So, I like to say that I am bought and paid for. I'm bought and paid for by the grassroots.
If elected, will you also not be taking special interest money?
Yes, that's my plan. Absolutely. I'd like to see publicly financed elections. I hope that the donor base that I have will stay with me as a member of Congress. I don't want to ever have to take a penny from a corporate interest. I find it unseemly, and what I hear that members of Congress are spending 30 hours a week dialing for dollars at these call centers. Who are they dialing? They're dialing CEOs and bankers. And if you spend 30 hours a week on the phone with with wealthy folks week after week, after a while, you're going to see the world through their eyes.
It's not to mention the hours they're spending at cocktail parties with these same people.
Well, that's true. And what's beautiful about my campaign, what I love about it, is that I haven't made a single call asking for $1. I haven't spent any time doing those call centers, and that's 30 hours a week that I'm spending meeting constituents and learning more about their problems. That's the kind of representative I'd like to be.
Where could people find more about you if they're interested?
They could go to our website at timcanova.com. We've got a Facebook page as well and Twitter. Yes.
Cool. Thanks so much for taking the time in person.
Thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you, Jordan.
Thanks.
Appreciate it.